האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov and good evening, everyone. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Tetzei, and we are going to do Os Zion, section 7. And the Zera Shimshon is going to focus on the fact that the Torah prohibits the Jewish people from allowing them to accept converts from the nations of Moab, male converts, I should specify, male converts from the nations of Moab and Ammon, and that this is an eternal prohibition. No matter how many generations pass, we are not allowed to accept converts from Ammon and Moab. So let's first look at the psukim that state this, and then we'll take a look at the Zera Shimshon's comments. This is Perek Chaf Gimel in Sefer Devarim, starting with Pasuk Dalet. Lo yovo Ammoni uMoavi b'kahal Hashem. A male member, as we know, Chazal interpret the pasuk, a member of Ammon, the nation of Ammon, and a member of the nation of Moab are not allowed to enter into the congregation of Hashem. They're not allowed to convert and marry a Jewish woman. Gam dor asiri lo yovu lahem b'kahal Hashem. Also, until the 10th generation, they will not be allowed to convert and marry a Jewish woman, ad olam, for all eternity. Next pasuk. Al devar asher lo kidmu eschem balechem uvamayim. On the matter that they did not come out to you with food and water, baderech, on the road, b'tzeischem mitzrayim, when you left Egypt. Va'asher sachar alecha es Bilam ben Beor, and because they hired the Bilam ben Beor mi Pesor Aram Naharayim, from the city of Pesor and Aram Naharayim, lekalalecha, to curse you. V'lo ova Hashem elokecha lishmoa es Bilam, and Hashem did not desire to listen to Bilam, vayahafoch Hashem es elokecha lecha es haklala livracha, and Hashem reversed for you the curse of Bilam into a blessing. Ki ahevcha Hashem elokecha, because Hashem loves you. Lo sidro shalomam v'tovasam, do not seek out the peace and the good for Ammon and Moab, those nations, kol yamecha la'olam, all your days forever. So the Torah makes it very clear how we should feel about the nations of Ammon and Moab. So the Zera Shimshon starts as follows. This is, again, Os Zion, section 7. Al devar asher lo kidmu eschem balechem. On the matter that they did not come out to give you, to provide food for you. Pirish Rashi explains, Al ha'etza sheyatsu eschem lahachatiachem. It is because they counseled against you to cause you to sin. So on this pasuk that we just read, Rashi says the reason we're not accepting the members of Ammon and Moab as converts to marry into the Jewish people is because of the plot, because of the conspiracy that they developed to make Bnei Yisrael sin in the episode of Baal Peor. V'hikshu, and the commentators ask al zeh on this, that the pasuk openly, explicitly provides a different reason than the reason of the conspiracy to make Klal Yisrael, to make Bnei Yisrael sin. Uminole l'Rashi lefarish tam acher. And how did Rashi come? How did he know to provide a different answer if it is not the one given by the pasuk? So that's a very strong question that the commentators ask on Rashi. Let's just pause for a moment to understand it. We read the psukim ourselves, and in the psukim, the pasuk clearly stated, do not accept members of Ammon and Moab because they did not come out to you with food. And then it did add a second reason, that they hired Bilam to curse you. Neither of those reasons are the reason that Rashi states. Rashi states it's because they came up with a plot to cause you to sin, again with the women and the idolatry and the episode of Baal Peor. So the commentators say, where did Rashi come up with that? That's the reason. It's not the reason stated in the pasuk. V'tirtzu, and these commentators answer, de Rashi diek milas dovar, that Rashi stated his reason because he focused on the word davar, matter or word, not just matter, but this word can mean word. Shahaya lo lomar al asher, because the pasuk should have said, if all it wanted to say was it's because of the fact that they did not bring you food, then it should have said al asher, on that they didn't bring you food, but it used the word davar, and the word davar means word, talking, word, and like vayedaber. And so Rashi focused on that, and he said, there must be more to it. And what's the more to it? It's the fact that they had a conspiracy. They talked amongst themselves about getting the Jewish people to sin, and that would weaken the Jewish people. And that was their plan to bring about the downfall, chas v'shalom, of Bnei Yisrael. So the Zera Shimshon says, Avalim kol zeh, but with all of that, even with that answer about this word davar and what Rashi learns from it, Kosher Tuva, Ladidon Kosher Tuva, to us, this is still a major question. The Zera Shimshon says to us, meaning to him, this is a major problem. Shahare Rashi Atzmo Kosav Kan B'Samach, because Rashi himself writes a little bit later where the Torah talks about the fact that Egyptians, people, descendants of Mitzrayim, Egyptians can be accepted after 3 generations as converts, and they can marry Jewish women. And so Rashi comments on that. Shahatam shenis avu Ammon Moav, the reason that Ammon and Moab, the people of Ammon and Moab, are abhorred and are not accepted as converts under any circumstances, no matter how much time passes. It is because they caused the Jewish people to sin. Because someone who causes a person to sin, it's worse than if he would kill that person. So Rashi's saying the Egyptians killed many members of Bnei Yisrael. They enslaved them, oppressed them, and killed them. How can they be accepted as converts after 3 generations? But the members of Ammon and Moab, who caused Bnei Yisrael to sin but did not kill them, certainly did not enslave them and oppress them, how are they never to be accepted? So Rashi answers and says it's because causing someone to sin is worse than killing them. Killing them only affects their body. Causing them to sin affects their neshama. And so that's worse. So what from that perspective, what Ammon and Moab did is worse than what the Egyptians did. Ve'lama lo pirish hakos of ikar hatam. So the Zera Shimshon now articulates his fundamental question for this piece: is why did the pasuk not explain the real reason, the main reason why we don't accept Ammon and Moab as converts? V'nokat tam she'eno ikar, and it stated a reason which is not the main reason, not the primary reason. Dahainu al asher lo kidmu, which is that they did not bring out food and water when Bnei Yisrael was had left Egypt and was approaching their land. So let's pause for a moment to make sure we are absolutely clear about the question here, because the Zera Shimshon developed the question by asking and dealing with some other things. But the fundamental question is this: in the pasuk, that in the psukim that we read, the Torah clearly enunciates and articulates the reason why we are not allowed to accept converts from Ammon and Moab, and that is because those nations did not bring out food when we left Egypt. They didn't bring out food and water to provide to the Jewish people, and that was an act that was apparently considered so heinous, so terrible, that they can't be accepted as converts. Rashi, however, says that That's not the primary reason. The primary reason is because they conspired against the Jewish people and caused them to sin. And that's the primary reason. So the Zera Shimshon says, why would the pasuk allude and hint to the primary reason by using the word davar, the words that they spoke, but state explicitly the reason that Rashi apparently only views as a secondary reason? That's the question that we need to keep in mind as we proceed further. Bottom paragraph. V'yesh lomar, and we can say, if the Torah had stated openly the reason about causing the Jewish people to sin, lo have efshalon lomar amoni velo ammonis, moavi velo moavis, then we would not be able to use this teaching, the very important, the vital teaching of Chazal on these psukim, which is that the Torah is only prohibiting male members of Ammon and male members of Moab from converting and marrying into the Jewish people. However, female members of Ammon and female members of Moab are allowed, should be allowed to convert and join the Jewish people. And of course, we know this is such a vital teaching because it allowed Rus, the Moabite, Rus from the nation of Moab, because she was a female, was allowed to convert and marry Boaz and enter the Jewish people. And of course, that led much later to the birth of David HaMelech. So that teaching of Chazal, the Zera Shimshon says, would not be possible if the Torah had stated that the main reason we don't accept Ammon and Moab is because they caused the Jewish people to sin. Shahare be'emes, because in truth, ikar hachet ba machmas hanoshim. The main sin that the Jewish people committed in that episode came through the women. The women seduced members of Bnei Yisrael to commit sexual immorality and to commit idolatry, or at least to commit a type of idolatry. And so that happened because of the women. Elakos of Hatam, but rather the Torah chose to write the reason, al asher lo kidmu, that these nations did not bring in food and water out, v'chule, etc. Shegam sham yesh lahakshos, but even there we could ask a similar question. Hoyulahem lekadem anoshim likras anoshim. The men should have brought out food. The Moabite and Ammonite men should have brought out food to the Jewish men. The noshim likras noshim, and the female members of Ammon and Moab should have brought out food and water to the women, to the women of Bnei Yisrael. So we could ask a similar question. V'tzarech l'taretz, but we would need to answer kol kivuda vasmelech penima, the famous pasuk from Tehillim. All of the honor of a princess is internal, is inside. A princess should not be glorified based on her external appearance and based on her going outside and making all kinds of appearances in public. Rather, the true glory of a princess, of a bas melech, is her internal character traits and her internal yira shamayim and her internal commitment to the mitzvos and the Torah values. That's where her honor and her glory is. And the Zera Shimshon therefore says, "Dahainu she'ein derech ha'isha lotzeis." This teaches us that it is not appropriate, it's not the proper path for a woman to be going out in public and trying to make it appear that it's her physical appearance and her clothing that really is what people should be attracted to and paying attention to. That is not the appropriate way. Umamela, and indirectly, anu lomdim, we're able to learn shema sheyatzu nami lahachti es Yisrael, the fact that the Moabite and Ammonite women came to seduce the men and Jewish men and make them sin, ein lahem shum onesh. They can't be punished for this. Shahari anusos hoyu me'avihen, because we understand that they were forced to do so by their fathers. Let's pause here for a moment, even though the Zera Shimshon clearly explains his answer more clearly explains what he wants to say and how he understands the pasuk in the next paragraph. But let's pause for a moment. The Zera Shimshon is telling us a fascinating aspect of understanding the psukim. And what he's saying is this, that the main reason, according to Rashi, that Ammon and Moab men are not allowed to be accepted as converts forever is because they came up with a conspiracy. And that comes from that word davar. Rashi focused on that word davar and learned out from it that that's the key word in the pasuk. And that's the main reason that we don't accept them, because they came up with a conspiracy and they talked amongst themselves. They used words to come up with, develop a plot to get the Jewish people to sin. However, the Torah could not state that as the main reason, because if the Torah did so, people would say, well, it was the women who primarily caused them into sin. Yes, the Moabite and Ammonite men developed this conspiracy, but then they sent in the women, and it was their daughters and women that they sent in who actually caused and seduced the Jewish men and caused them to sin. So therefore, if the Torah had stated that reason, Chazal would have had a hard time, perhaps an impossible time, explaining their halacha, their ruling, that only Moabite men and Ammonite men are not allowed to convert, but the women are allowed to be accepted as converts. So therefore, the Torah stated what, according to Rashi, is a secondary reason, and that is that they did not come out with food and water to the people. However, the Zera Shimshon says there's another subtle piece to it, because we could ask that the women were also guilty just like the men, if that's the sin you want to focus on, and that even if it's the secondary sin of not bringing out food and water, the women should have brought out food and water to the Jewish women. The Ammonite Moabite men could have brought out food and water to the Jewish men, and the Ammonite Moabite women could have brought out food and water out to the Jewish women. So still they're guilty of a trespass of a sin, even if it's the secondary sin. So he answers that the pasuk intends for us to understand that the women apparently can't be blamed for either sin. They can't be blamed for bringing out the food and water, because that would be inappropriate and it would violate principles of modesty that the Torah expounds. And they can't be blamed also, therefore, for seducing the men, because it's clear that if they refuse to bring out food and water and they're not to be punished for that, then that must mean that, of course, definitely they originally refused to seduce Jewish men and go out and do such an immoral act, but they were forced to do so by the men, and therefore it is only the men of Moab and Ammon who are not accepted as converts, but the women can be accepted. And the Zera Shimshon sees all of that hidden in these psukim. And now he will explain it further. Upirish ha-pasuk kachu. And the correct explanation of the pasuk is as follows. Lefi ha'emes, according to the truth, ikar hatam shenis avu Ammon Moab. The primary reason that Ammon and Moab are abhorred and rejected and not accepted as converts, hu al hachet shehechetiyom. It is because of the sin that they caused the Jewish people to sin, which they developed, they brought about because of their conspiracy and plot. Aval lo al hamasa hachet mamish, but not because of the actual incidents of the sinning. Ella al ha'etz of a hachreach, but rather because of this conspiracy and this coercion, she'ansu ha'avos espinosehem, that the fathers forced their daughters to participate in it. Vizehu al davar, and this is all alluded to in the word al davar. It's on the thing. Rashi wants, Zera Shimshon wants us to understand that according to Rashi, when we see the word davar, we should pause and not read it as connected to the rest of the pasuk. It's on the thing that they didn't bring out food, but rather it's about the words that they spoke. That's actually the ikar hachet. That's the main spin, the sin, the conspiracy to get the Jewish men to sin. Va'afilu hachi, but nevertheless, even so, even though that's the main sin, im haya lahem haschus, if the people of Ammon and Moab would have had the merit, liyos makdimin belechem umayim, to bring out to the Jewish people bread and water when they first left Mitzrayim, hayu niskanim kitzas, then they would have repaired and helped, mitigated the circumstances. They would have helped the situation. Mishum de beperik yud aleph to Sanhedrin, because we see in a Gemara in the 11th parak of Sanhedrin, Amrinon, where the Gemara says, Gedola legima, great is providing food, shemikareves harachokim, because it brings close those who are far away, ume'alemes ayin min harishoyim, and it covers the eye from the sins of wicked people. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us that bringing out food and water accomplishes incredible things. It can bring people, and the Gemara gives an example of Yisro. It can bring a person like Yisro, who had tried all the avodah zaras in the world and worshiped them. It can bring him to ultimately join the Jewish people. And it can protect people from, even though they did terrible sins, it can protect them because of the chesed of that they provided food to needy people. Aval achshav shelo kidmu nisavu. But now that they did not, Moab and Ammon did not provide food to the Bnei Yisrael when they first left Egypt, so they are being rejected. Now let's just pause again to understand this amazing lesson that the Zera Shimshon is teaching us in the way he understands the pasuk, and that is that both reasons are tied together very closely. The primary reason is the one that is only hinted to with the word davar, and that's that they caused the Jewish people to sin. That's the primary reason, and we've already explained why that is alluded to, and not written as the primary reason. But in addition to that, the secondary reason of not providing food and water for the Israel becomes incredibly important, because had Moab, the people of Ammon and Moab, provided food and water, then they would not have been rejected forever. There might have been an arrangement to allow them to join the Jewish people after only 3 generations, as was stated with Mitzrayim and as the Torah states with Bnei Esav. So we understand that that has major ramifications, because providing food and water, providing sustenance to needy people has an incredible power and incredibly powerful ramifications, but they did not do that, and so they forfeited their chance to make up in an important way for causing the Jewish people to sin in the episode of Baal Peor. Now, the Zera Shimshon is now going to shift to a second kind of section, because he's going to ask a question on what he said so far in the next paragraph, and then the paragraph after that, he's going to answer that question. So his fundamental idea that he went, fundamental concept and idea in the way of learning the psukim, he's already stated, and now he's going to ask a question on that and then answer his question. V'im tomar, and if you say, v'harei Moab shela b'sof arba'im shana, the nation of Moab, after 40 years had passed, when they got a second chance, kidem lahem belechem umayim, we see that they did bring out food and water for Bnei Yisrael. Kedichsiv, as the pasuk is written, ochel bakesef tashbireni. Moshe Rabbeinu, at the end of the 40 years, when Bnei Yisrael is approaching Sichon, the area where Sichon lived, he sends a message that says, sell us food, ka'asher osuli b'nei Esav, like the people of the nation of Esav did, v'hamoavim hayoshvim ba'ar, and the Moavim did so, the ones who live in Ar. Va'afilu hachi nisavu. Even though we see from this pasuk that he just quoted, that at the end of the 40 years, Moshe says the people of Moab did come out and give us food and water, not originally when we left Egypt, but later when we came around again, they gave us food and water. But nonetheless, we see that they were still rejected. So everything we said before seems to, this is a question, everything we said before, that had they provided sustenance to the Jewish people, they wouldn't have been rejected forever from conversion. And yet we see they did provide, in fact, food and water and sustenance at a later point, and they weren't accepted. They weren't accepted as converts nonetheless. So the Zera Shimshon says, Yesh lomar k'moshe kosov maharsha b'Sanhedrin. We can answer according to an answer that the Maharsha gives in Masechta Sanhedrin. Shahaya lohem lasos bechinam. Number one, they should have given the food for free. Instead of selling food and water to the Jewish people, they should have provided it for free. L'tashlim gemul, as a payback, Masha Osa Avram Avinu la'avihem lot, as a payback for all of the incredible kindnesses that Abraham showed to Lot. We know that Abraham adopted Lot after Lot's father died, but was Abraham's brother. We know that Lot became very extraordinarily wealthy because of his connection to Abraham. We know that when the time came for Sodom to be destroyed, Lot was only saved by a malach because of the merit and the schus of Abraham. So Lot. And then we know when Lot was captured and taken away in a war, Abraham came and rescued him. So Lot owned everything. Lot owned his life. Lot owned his wealth. Lot owned everything that he could possibly, every blessing he had, he owed to Avram Avinu. So they should have brought out, in recognition of this, they should have brought out food and water to Bnei Yisrael happily without charging them. And number two, they should have done this at their first opportunity when Bnei Yisrael first left Mitzrayim. They not after waiting 40 years. The Isa Barashi, and it states in Rashi of a Medrash and the Medrash Yalkut Shimoni, Baderech. What does it mean they didn't bring out food and water when Bnei Yisrael was on the road? So Rashi brings down from the Medrash, B'shas terufchem, at the time when you were confused, when Bnei Yisrael really needed help and assistance, is when they first left Mitzrayim, when they were first trying to, get over and heal from the terrible experiences of slavery and bondage and suffering. That's when they needed the assistance the most that Moab and Ammon could have provided. But Moab and Ammon did not provide any assistance or help at that time. So even though they provided it later, it did not take away the fact that they would be prohibited from joining the Jewish people. Ve'im tomar shemashalo asu b'chinam, and if you want to ask on this explanation that we just gave, that they should have done it for free, maybe you'll say, wait a minute. What do you mean they should have done it for free? Ein lahem kol kach ashma. You can't blame them so much. They don't bear so much guilt for not doing it, for providing sustenance for free. Shetzarech mipnei shetzarech mamon harbe. Top of the next column. It would require so much wealth. Lahachil shishim ribo, to provide food for a nation of 600,000 people, and of course that's only 600,000 men above the age of 20. We know that there were millions. The nation as a whole involved millions when you take into account all of the men, women, old people, and children. You're talking about a number in the millions. So how can we blame the nation of Moab and Ammon for not bringing out food for free to supply all of the needs of this people? The money of Moab and Ammon, like most people, is precious to them. They don't have that kind of millions and millions of dollars to throw away. And since they took pity on their own money, that could be a valid reason why they didn't come forth to feed Bnei Yisrael the first time when they needed it. Omnam, however, later on, when they saw and they heard reports that Bnei Yisrael paid Bnei Esav for the food and the water, then they also came forth to provide the sustenance that Bnei Yisrael needed. So the Zera Shimshon says, you might ask a very interesting question and a strong question, which is, of course, they didn't come out with food the first time. They didn't think that they could possibly supply all of those people, all of the huge members of Bnei Yisrael with food and water without getting paid. How could they do that? And they had a valid reason to think that. However, later when they saw that Bnei Yisrael paid for the food and water, then they came out and provided it and they sold it. But the Zera Shimshon says, Im Kain, if that's so, Lama Hotziu Kol Kach Mamon Im Bilam. We would then ask if they were protecting their money, so protective of their money, and they didn't have much money, why were they willing to pay so much money to Bilam? And we know that his soul was very wide, meaning his desires for wealth were tremendous. Kemosha Omar, as the pasuk says, as Bilam says, Im yiten li bolak mole beso kesef v'zohav. Bilam says when the officers come to tell him that Balak wants to hire him to curse the Jewish people, he says, I can't go. And even if Balak were to give me his whole palace full of silver and gold, in order to curse the Jewish people, I still couldn't do it. So Chazal are very, very sharp reading of that pasuk, and they say, you see, Bilam could have just said, I can't do it because Hashem told me I can't do it. But you see Balak's true motivation. Bilam says, I can't do it. And even if Balak, wishful thinking, even if Balak were to offer me his palace full of silver and gold, I still can't do it. Bilam was hinting to them what would motivate him to consider doing it. So the Chazal say, you see that he was tremendously greedy and wanted a tremendous payment to do this. Elavadai mikan, but definitely from that episode, Muchach, it proves they were not careful about how they spent their money. Just the opposite. You see that what really motivated Ammon and Moab was their hatred of Bnei Yisrael. Not that they were trying to protect their money and they thought they couldn't afford to provide the food. And the fact that after 40 years, the people of Moab did provide food, it wasn't it was only for their own benefit. It wasn't out of any kind of love of the Jews or desire to help them. It was for their own selfish reasons. In order to receive the money that the Jews paid, and to sell their property. They realized that this is a good business deal. We have all kinds of things that we can sell them, food and water, and they're going to pay good hard cash, and that's why they did it at the end. And because of this, they were rejected lawfully. When the Torah rejects Ammon and Moab, it all adds up and it makes sense because we understand how Ammon and Moab truly thought and truly operated. Now the Zera Shimshon, you might say, adds a third little piece here because he has one more question on the psukim that we read, so he attaches it to the end of this piece, even though it's a separate point on a separate pasuk, one of the psukim that we read, but not the ones we've been referring to. The Omar HaKosav in the pasuk said, and we read this pasuk, V'lo ava v'chule, Hashem did not want to lishmoa el Bilam, to listen to the curse of Bilam, vayahafoch, and Hashem reversed it, lecha, for you, as haklala lebracha. He turned the curses into blessings. V'koshe, the Zera Shimshon says, this is a problem. Mahu milas lecha. What is the word lecha doing in this pasuk? For you, lecha, for you. Shahare haklala lo ba'a le'olam. No curse ever came into the world. Bilam did not, in fact, bring out a curse against the Jews. V'lo yotza min hapeh, and it never exited his mouth. V'lo higia liYisrael, and it certainly never struck the Jewish people. V'im kain milas lecha miuterasi, and if so, the word lecha, meaning God changed the curse for you into a blessing. The word lecha doesn't need to be there at all because God didn't need to protect the Jewish people from the curse of Bilam and turn it into a blessing. Bilam never uttered a curse. They were never in danger of a curse from Bilam. V'yesh lomar, and we can say shekvar yadua, it's already known. Shehamavarech es Yisrael yegam hu baruch, that someone who blesses Bnei Yisrael will be blessed. When the Zera Shimshon says it's already known, presumably this means already back from the beginning in Parshas Lech Lecha, Hashem stated this to Avram Avinu. So we know that if someone curses a descendant of Avraham Avinu, if someone blesses a descendant of Avraham Avinu, a member of Bnei Yisrael, that person will be blessed. V'hamakalalas Yisrael, and someone who curses a Jewish person, Ye'oror, that person will be cursed. V'kamash molon kra, and the pasuk here is coming to teach us sha'af al pisha Bilam beirach es Yisrael, even though Bilam blessed the Jewish people. Im kol zeh lo nisparech. He was not blessed. This is an exception to the rule. Bilam blessed the Jews, but he did not receive a blessing in return for that. Ela adarabba, but the opposite. Lefisha kavonoso hayuso lekalel, because Bilam's intention originally was to curse the Jewish people. Bilam kept saying to Balak, let's try again, let's go to a new place, let's offer more sacrifices, let's do whatever we can to allow me to so to speak, trick God to allowing me to curse the Jewish people. That was Bilam's goal. Uba umos, and when we're talking about the non-Jewish nations of the world, HaKadosh Baruch Hu choshev hamachshava kamaisa. We have a principle from Chazal that Hashem considers their intention and their thoughts as if they acted upon it, even though they were not able to act upon it. Mishum hachi, because of this, nishar bechlal orarecha oror. Bilam, even though the words he said were words of blessing on Bnei Yisrael, he is included in the pasuk and in the rule of those who curse you will be cursed. V'zehu vayahafoch lecha. And this is why the pasuk said God reversed the blessing and turned it into a curse for you. Dafka es haklala levracha v'lo lebilam. God only did this for you, for Bnei Yisrael, but not for Bilam. He said words of a blessing, but he did not get credit for blessing the Jewish people. He was punished for cursing the Jewish people. And we know the fate of Bilam was ultimately to be killed by Bnei Yisrael later. And that was a just punishment for his crimes. V'ayin od le'el sof parshas Balak, and you can see previously the Zera Shimshon says what he wrote at the end of Parshas Balak. So the Zera Shimshon has presented us with a tour de force. He has taken the psukim that we read in the beginning and opened up entirely new vistas, entirely new ways to understand the psukim, to read the psukim, and to see what the psukim are really, the lessons that the psukim are really teaching us. He's also dealt with another question and answer, and then a third question on the last pasuk in the section that we read. Then he's tied it all together and answered all questions as he always does. Yashar koach for joining us this week, and God willing, we'll look forward to learning the Zera Shimshon again on next week's parsha.